What a weekend for the New York Mets against the Pittsburgh Pirates. We'll discuss why it may kind of feel like a bad dream for Mets fans, but there's a lot to dissect. Obviously, Edwin Diaz, his issues, the injuries to deGrom and Lindor, and what should happen with this team at the trade deadline, their issues offensively. We'll talk about all of it. It starts right now. Welcome to the Shea Anything Podcast, everybody. It's Doug Williams and Andy Martino with you on this Monday. Reminder to subscribe, rate, and review this podcast wherever you get your podcast. And Shea Anything is brought to you by Verizon. It's 5G built right for the Mets from the network more people rely on, only on Verizon.
Doug, where do you get your podcasts?
I get them from two different places, which is not purposeful, but I listen to them on Spotify and the podcast app.
Okay.
Where do you get your podcasts?
I only listen to one podcast. It's the Mark Maron one sometimes, but I think I get it on my phone. Is that what you call the podcast app?
I mean, I think we're talking about a phone either way, Andy.
It's this thing that says
you really just sounded like a boomer.
Well, I don't care.
I get it on my cellular device.
As you know,
that's all we're talking about is on your phone. I try
to live as little of a digital life as possible as the years go by.
You're talking about the purple podcast app, which is the Apple one.
That's where I get my podcast. And sometimes I listen to Shea Anything when I want to see if I'm interrupting too much, like right now.
Okay. Yep. Self-critiques are important.
Yeah.
Let's do a 3-batter rule. You know, it was funny yesterday when I thought that the Mets were going to, lose that game and get swept before the Conforto homer, et cetera. I was like, it does feel a little bit like a funny bad dream. Like if during the All-Star break, a Mets fan had woken up in the middle of the night in a sweat and been like, I had the funniest dream. Gary Thorne was doing the play-by-play instead of Gary Cohen. Be like, oh, like that's kind of funny. And then, the Mets got swept by the Pirates. It was just like awful. It really it was one of those weekends where people in my life were texting me like, oh my gosh, the Mets. We had Jon Stewart tweeting like, hello, 911, the New York Mets are trying to kill me. Mm-hmm. It was just that type of weekend. It wasn't just the way they were playing, but it was also, deGrom on the injured list. Lindor feels the oblique and he's on the IL.
Yeah, that's bad.
Lots to discuss. I want to start with deGrom because I feel like this is probably the most interesting of all the topics to come out of the weekend. Is there a line, Andy, and you're a reporter, so I'm always curious to know what you decide is worth reporting on and writing about, et cetera. Mm-hmm. Do you think there's a line in today's professional athlete, especially somebody as dynamically talented as deGrom, where he's listening to his body too much and is getting too many clean MRIs, and it's starting to be something that maybe the average person at home is like, if he's really healthy and he thinks he's hurt, is this becoming a problem?
It's not our place to talk about how another man's body feels. Really, it's tough to say. Is there a line in some people's minds? Sure, but that's a subjective thing. It's a tough one. It's like, obviously neither of us is going to have any knowledge of how an athlete's body actually feels. And it's worth noting that MRIs don't always catch everything. There's different levels of it. There's the ones with a dye. There's the one. So certainly possible that there's something going on that they haven't detected in an image yet. But that's all just total speculation. And what we do know is that he hasn't been healthy enough to pitch a full season. For whatever the severity of that, he can't go out there every 5 days and last deep into a game. And what it takes me back to is that unfortunate truism of pitching that you learn year in and year out is that when someone's doing something spectacular, particularly with velocity, it's rare that it lasts because it's dangerous to throw a baseball fast and with a lot of break or spin. And so many times you see that guy throwing 100 with a slider in the low 90s. Let me try that again. You see a guy throwing 100-mile-an-hour fastball with a slider in the low 90s.
I think that made sense. I think you got it. What did
you
think?
You babbling with pitches and velocities and stuff, so I decided to state it more clearly. Anyway, that guy oftentimes doesn't last 200 innings or so, or year after year after year. So when deGrom's velocity went up, everyone who watches pitching year in and year out goes, uh-oh. And it's just part of it. You go, wow, right. But you also go, uh-oh. So that's what I would say about that.
The Mets aren't, I think, as you've reported on, they want to be the West Coast Dodgers. They want to, under this new ownership, compete for a World Series every year and be one of those teams that puts a winning product out there and is at least putting themselves in a position to win every year. We're in year one, and, the Mets are a first place team in a bad division, but they're not, I think you would agree, they're not in a place where they, in regular seasons yet, do what the Dodgers do with Kershaw, which is manage him very closely. And if he has to go on the IL, there's really no downside to that in June, July, whatever. So I don't think that's what's happening here. I don't think deGrom and the Mets are coming together yeah, my body kind of hurts. Let's rest so that I'm healthy for October. I think the Mets realize how important deGrom is right now to what they want to get done and what they want to accomplish. So how do you think a team handles this when, they're monitoring deGrom very closely, obviously, but the imaging doesn't show anything. So how do you think the Mets, what's the best way for them to handle deGrom moving forward?
Well, so far, look, they can't force a player to play when he says he doesn't feel well enough to. So the way what we've seen is when he wants to come out of a game, they take him out of a game. I suppose that's the way it should be. You just have to believe the player. In terms of a load management situation going forward, I agree with you that there isn't some grand plan being designed. You have a strong-willed player who is, you would obviously have to strike a balance between player and team of here's what we're going to do, here's what's safe versus what the player says he wants to do or can do or can't do. You saw, obviously, deGrom's body language at his Zoom news conference was not especially perky. He's clearly unhappy with the overall situation, and that's the kind of mood that the team has to manage when a player's hurt. So it's not easy, but no, it's not. I agree with you. It's not some grand plan. And with Kershaw, that only happened after he spent many, many years as the best regular season pitcher in baseball. It would be a bummer for everyone involved if deGrom was all of a sudden at that stage of his career.
Right. Even though they're oddly, they're the same age.
Well, yeah, and that's something that people forget with deGrom. People got a little carried away with deGrom's going to be an all-star till he's 57 years old. It's their pitchers get into their 30s, and these things do happen. And it's a bummer for deGrom's ability to make money for a long time in the game that he started so late. It's just, it is what it is, but he is of a certain age, and that can't be avoided. I'm not sitting here telling you that we know that he's hitting that phase in his career, but certainly the evidence this year is that he went from being the most effective pitcher in baseball for 2-3 years and pretty healthy. Things would pop up, but pretty healthy, to this year, the most effective pitcher when he's out there, but not a full go in terms of a season.
I guess the combination of the two questions that I've asked you is kind of the big picture topic is, for somebody like Kershaw, they're always, big league players are never 100% during a season because it's long and really difficult to stay healthy. If it's the right strategy to put someone on the IL for rest, you can always point to an injury because there's always going to be something. Mm-hmm. And in Kershaw's case, I'm sure that's happened because the Dodgers realize it's the smartest thing to do at this point in his career. And I think you and I agree, it's not what's happening with deGrom. He really is in pain. He doesn't feel right. He doesn't think he's right on the mound. And I think it was clear for a couple starts there after he got a clean MRI back where he's trying to pitch through something. And he's I guess the tests say I'm healthy, but he clearly didn't feel right. So I'm just curious to know what's going to come of it and how the Mets will handle it if, he picks up the ball again and he's yeah, I'm still not right. And they're well, dude, we need you and you're healthy. I don't know what to tell you.
Well, he's not healthy, as you said. If his forearm hurts, he's not healthy.
Yeah. If he says he's not healthy, he's not healthy.
What we've seen is a change in the rhetoric this time in two ways. He's saying now that everything else was on a swing and this one was not on a swing. So that's a very unfortunate difference. And they're also saying now that he's not going to throw a baseball until he doesn't feel that anymore in his forearm. Before it was like, no, he's going to start in 4 days. Don't worry. And we're like, no, he's not. And then he does. It's so different now. It's like, he's not throwing a ball until he feels better. And the weeks can go by fast when a pitcher's in that kind of situation. So it seems to me like we're not going to see him for a little bit, but there's no way to define that because they just seem to be waiting on to see what his forearm tells him. But yeah, it's the messaging around it is certainly more alarming for a longer term absence this time than it has been so far this season.
All right. As for the on the field stuff this weekend, I want to get right into the Taijuan Walker foul ball toss. Mm-hmm. I mean, it was a genuinely hilarious play, objectively. The Mets ended up winning the game. I'm sure Taijuan still doesn't think it's funny, and Luis Rojas probably still doesn't think it's funny.
Still running around bumping people with his chest.
Oh my gosh! So, first of all, I didn't get, and this is not our fault on SNY because we're still dealing with a situation where they're dealing with another truck. I'm not sure I ever got the replay I desired on that play.
I felt like I did. I felt like the first one I saw, he clearly touches the ball when it's on the white line. No, fair ball.
Yes, I agree with you. I thought barely a fair ball, but a fair ball nonetheless. And then you see the vantage point of Walker, like the camera that's closest to him when it's obviously foul. So it is a fair ball, but from the other view, it looks really, really, really foul. So anyway, Rojas comes out, and you're right. It's like he was using his chest as he was just getting all up into the umpire's business.
Maybe arms, maybe he couldn't lift his arms. Maybe he had some kind of temporary condition.
I mean, first of all, the man is absolutely jacked and also happens to be generally pretty soft-spoken and reserved.
Yeah,
and
that chest, I would fall over if I were bumped by.
Yes. What did you think of? I don't know. That felt like a real genuine moment.
Yeah, he was mad. Yeah, two middle-aged to somewhat older men had to hold him back. Those poor Dave Joust, Gary. Dave Joust. He was mad. It's like, I don't know if that. You're right. He's so placid usually. Did he just get mad about something that happened in high school and he finally let it come out, or was it? The deGrom and Lindor stuff. It didn't feel like a performance to me, like some managers will typically do. That's for sure. But again, he has an instinct once again to hit the right note, because as he was still live down 6-0, so was his team, and they came back. And I don't think that's completely insignificant. That you look at this guy and you're like, well, if he's going to be so emotional about this game, I suppose we should probably keep trying for the rest of the day. So there is some of that. One criticism of it, when a player is about to get ejected, a manager has to come and get in between them so you're not costing the team. Well, Rojas cost his team because they're going to be without him for some period of time. So he should have had the self-control not to make physical contact with the
He should have reined his chest in.
Yeah, the chest is big, so maybe
it's a large chest.
Also, but I mean, now he's going to get suspended, and then Dave Joust is not a manager; is going to manage the team. So that's not great.
That's a good point. If I were Walker, it's a pretty embarrassing thing to have happen, and it must have felt good to know that your manager is totally behind your story of why that play happened.
Yeah, that's true.
I think, Walker's trying to make the right play. Like if he thinks that ball is foul and may go fair, you're supposed to swat it out. Don't waste any more time. And again, it looked to both of them clearly like the ball was foul, and they weren't changing their stories after the game. But again, there's one camera angle where it's like that ball's barely fair, which means it's fair.
And as we've learned since Little League, when a ball is barely foul, the smart play is to chuck it into the dugout. That's what you're supposed to do.
Yep. And then
what it reminded me of once he got mad was the famous David Cohn argument where the runners circle the bases. It was in that zone of like your brain just does something weird in a moment almost.
I saw that Cohn tweeted about it. And
did he?
Yeah. And he was like, it never goes away. Like, you just have to make fun of yourself a little bit for it. The funny, like, Cohn had the ball. The Walker one. The Walker one.
What's worse? Because what was he doing with the ball? You don't really see that.
You're really like supposed to just like swat it out. touch it as soon as possible. Now you could just tap your finger on it, but there's less dramatic effect with that.
Maybe I'm wrong, but I watch a lot of baseball and I don't remember balls being swatted like that much in that situation.
I think it happens. Andy, third of the 3-batter roll. We've done 2 out of 3. You were all over the Diaz story last week, and I remember noting it on BNNY a couple times where you were like, I understand the skepticism of a Met fan when they look forward to October and what should be a playoff team. And, this guy and Edwin Diaz is their closer. And I can understand the nervousness that comes from that. Do you know what his issues are?
Look, I don't think it's fair. I've felt this way ever since the Garrett Cole spin rate stuff was in the spotlight. When you have a systemic issue in the game that's so widespread, singling out individual people's spin rates is not necessarily fair, but I guess I've just done it. I mean, his spin rate is down. That's something the team has to be aware of and say, okay, well, but as the Yankees with Cole, they have to be like, we don't blame him. He was doing something that was widespread, but fact is the spin rate's down. And now, the dominance apparently is a little bit less. So there's that. I checked around. No one sees anything mechanical that's significant with him that's affecting his command. I just think that for whatever reason, and just like you can't get inside deGrom's forearm, I can't get inside Diaz's brain, but he's just never, ever, ever felt like that lockdown, badass, killer closer that he was supposed to be, even when he has good stretches. And as you said, we've talked about this before, but when logical people get all like, if you think Diaz is risky, you're a moron because the stats say this. It's like, nah, he's pretty risky. I've never seen a player single-handedly ruin a season the way he did in 2019 with the Mets. They are a playoff team with a halfway competent closer. It's that simple that year. So that's the same person.
Yeah. And it's one of those things where what you're talking about, Andy, is feel. Like, what does it feel like to be a Mets fan? You're drawing the conclusion logically from 2019 that was so bad. And there are numbers to back that up. But like, you can't argue with any Met fan who's like, it doesn't feel like the game's over when he comes in. Like you can't show me any number from 2020, from 2021 that is going to invalidate what the average Met fan at Citi Field who's having fun and is there with your family, when he comes into the game, what does that feel like?
Right.
And that, in my opinion, for a closer, it might be the only position that's important. Like their job is to, it's the old Joe Girardi thing that we've talked about before. You're supposed to kind of exhale when they come in the game.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. He's the Joe Girardi of closers. He makes you tense by his very presence, even though he's has periods of effectiveness. Even this year, look, in fairness to Diaz, so many times when he comes in, it's just over in a hurry and he's dominant. It still is the case, but I think we're on the same page here. Sal Licata deserves credit because he's always been like nobody. I'm distracted by a note from our
Jeff.
This has never happened.
Jeff clearly is fired up about this. So our producer just chatted us as if we're not chats us on Zoom as if we're not hosting a podcast. Let's see. Here's what Jeff's thoughts are. He comes out with zero command on given outings. Look at where McCann set up on pitches the other night and look where all the pitches ended up. Thanks, Jeff.
There you go. Well, that's a good point. But as I said, thank you, Jeff. And as I said, I looked into some, just, is there anything, sometimes like with Familia, it's really obvious something happens with his leg that affects his command. Other guys fly open, this and that. People see it better than I do, but I haven't heard anything that Diaz is doing on that. So whether it's confidence that day, whether it's something that's harder to detect by the naked eye, I don't know. But yes, sometimes he just doesn't know where the ball is going, obviously.
Not great.
They have other relief options. I mean, look, there are teams like recently, the Red Sox and the Astros won World Series with very severe closer issues during the postseason. In 17, AJ Hinch was using Ken Giles as his closer.
He was just punching himself in the head.
Yeah, into the ALCS. And by the end of the World Series, it was McCullers or Morton that closed the last game of the World Series. I should know this. One was one series, one was the other. Right.
McCullers was the Yankees series, right. Yeah.
So, and Chris Sale was on the mound instead of Craig Kimbrell the following year when the Red Sox won. So these are things that can be worked out on the fly if need be.
And when the Mets acquire Kimbrell and Bryant from the Cubs this year, it'll just be like who's going to make you sweat less, Kimbrell or Diaz in October? It's just going to be exhausting.
Yeah.
Because both Kimbrell's the exact same way as Diaz. Like you'll watch him one night, you'll be like, this guy's unhittable. Mm-hmm. And then you watch him another, he'll walk 3 straight hitters and it's just crazy. Again, he has been as good as it gets as a closer and as bad as it gets. Mm-hmm. It makes you realize just how rare great closers are. There really aren't that many, and there haven't been many in the history of baseball.
How many times during Mariano Rivera's career were people like, oh, Eric Gagne's better, or Houston Street is better, or that's like maybe this year.
Yeah, for a year tops.
Mm-hmm.
Which is crazy to think. And then they'd fade. Those careers would fade and his would keep going. You're listening to the Shea Anything Podcast brought to you by Verizon. It's 5G built right for the Mets from the network. More people rely on only on Verizon. So again, we're coming up on the week before the deadline. And I guess I'm curious, Andy, given the 2 injuries to Lindor and deGrom, given the closeness of the division at this point, can you add any more to your reporting last week about the Mets' potential interest in Bryant, et cetera?
Just that as Friday, they hadn't talked, really. There were reports popping up like, oh, the Mets are interested in Bryant, but nothing has actually happened. I don't know if that changed over the weekend yet. It's my job to stay on it, of course, but my latest is that there hadn't been any substantive conversations. That there had been with Pittsburgh to the point at least where they knew that Adam Frazier was probably not going to be an option for the Mets. And, the interest in Donaldson is there. It's still quite a bit like we're still at the point where when you ask these questions of GMs, they go, come on, dude, it's 2 weeks until the deadline or 10 days until the deadline. It's still
as if that means like the question is silly. Like it's 2 weeks.
That's whatever, but that's still, it almost has to be like the night before they'll be like, okay, it's time for this to be a relevant question. But they still consider it quite early before that. The draft is a real factor here later than usual, and it did distract GMs. So that's
by the way, Omar made the point on the show with you on Friday that, and I think you might have made the point too, but the Cubs and Mets had dialogue about Bryant going back to last offseason. And the point that you made about the draft being a big distraction from any deadline conversation or questions from people like you makes sense. But again, there's been dialogue between Jed Hoyer and, probably Sandy Alderson going back to last offseason. So that may help. It's speculative, but it may help. Question just occurred to me, and we can leave this in the podcast or not. When occasionally on Mondays, Andy, I've noticed that we'll talk about something interesting on the podcast. And then by the time we do the show at 6, you'll write a column on a topic that we discussed. Is that coincidental? Or is that was interesting on the podcast kind of subconsciously? Maybe I should write about that.
Probably some of that. You can get inspiration from all kinds of places. But also before noon on Monday is a bad time to report just to have information because it's pretty early for people in the industry to start answering questions for that day. I have sent this morning. I let myself sleep in because my son's not here. I woke up at 9:50 something, which is very rare for me. So between 9:50 and about 11:50 when I logged on, I sent text to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 sources in the game. None of whom has gotten back to me yet. Most of whom probably will in the afternoon. So if that answers your question, in this business, you cannot know what you're writing at noon on most days. The people aren't answering your questions yet.
Okay. I sometimes I credit, sometimes I credit Jeff. Sometimes
Can
I
you give
credit
me a
myself.
concrete example? And I will admit if it was inspired by a rundown.
No, I don't think there's any shame or anything in terms of it being inspired. It may just be coincidental because we talk about the big Mets topics and the Mets are one of the teams you report on. And if we're talking about a big topic, it probably is one. So
Monday's weird with general, like teams are gathering their, interpretations of whatever weekend series they played. Oftentimes Monday's a travel day. You've gotten to the next place late. Oftentimes executives that I might need to speak to are traveling with a team. Speak to a lot of agents who are on the West Coast, so you can't really get them until late morning in New York. Just for better accuracy, we should be taping this show around, afternoon. But that creates some logistical issues that Jeff doesn't like either. So maybe we should. It's very early to have.
Also, it's possible that if we tape the podcast later than noon, we wouldn't be able to see your hair matted to your forehead.
That's true. That's true. As a sports writer showers early after, I usually shower after lunch for afternoon and evening. That's my general. That's true too. But this is a problem. It's a problem for our podcast. Look, the poor people who run our website every morning around 9 something, they're texting me, "Hey, what do you got today?" And I'm like, dude, this industry is not even awake yet. I'm sorry. There's no way
that.
That's part of it.
I would fit right in.
Yeah.
I sleep in.
It doesn't work great for me because I'm old enough now to have become more of a early to bed, early riser. So there's just like, hey, I'm sorry. I know it's 6:54, but are you trading for Chris Bryant today? What?
So, okay, for our final topic, let me ask you this. You're waking up in the Mets front office today after that weekend in Pittsburgh. Do you think that they feel the need to acquire a position player more than they did at the All-Star break?
I think they probably know their team and they know that they needed it then and they know that they need it now. It's not like they lost a lot of 2021 production by losing Lindor for what will probably be an extended period of time. So I don't think it's more. I think it's maybe a little more urgent in the sense that I think the division is legitimately a little bit right now.
Yeah.
For the first time in a while. Maybe that gives you a little extra urgency to add that prospect to that trade that you don't want to do, but something like that. Phillies, I've never been a believer in the Phillies, but they have been winning and they're right there now. So the division, it seems like the Mets better start performing in some ways to the level that they've long been expected to. I should finish the sentence before moving to the next one, which was going to be
self-critique. That'll be a self-critique when you fire up your iPhone to listen to the podcast. Oh, I get these podcasts from my phone. I think I'll turn this thing on and listen. I feel like they refuse to talk about JD Davis as anywhere close to an everyday third baseman. That's been a common theme going back to spring training. Mm-hmm. That I guess that's one thing that I've taken note of, and we've talked about it on shows too, that basically JD Davis as an offensive player is well good enough to start, but they basically refuse to fully back him, endorse him as an everyday third baseman.
It's true.
I have thought of that, and you don't have your starting shortstop now. Jeff McNeil isn't exactly what you thought he was so far this season. Mm-hmm. I think there's an opening. I've said for the last couple of weeks that I think they're eventually going to hit, and I'm not sure they need a position player, but I think
what they need is for these talented hitters to perform to the level that's expected. Now, there's so many of them that aren't, obviously. And you're right. It is weird that JD Davis comes up and he hits like 9 home runs in his first game. They're like, we need to replace that guy. That's the one we need to get rid of. It is a little. The only one that hits games when he's here.
Louis, what'd you think of JD's 5 for 5 night with 5 home runs? Yeah, he's one of our third base options. He's one of our best options at third base. It's like, okay, you clearly don't think this guy can play that position.
If you're looking at the Mets upgrading their offense, because most of their issues are with underperformance. That is why, in all seriousness, why they've identified third base. Because if just go around the diamond, it's like you're not making a trade to replace your first baseman. Second base is something you might be able to talk about, but you do want McNeil's bat in the lineup. McNeil's in the category of perform better. I wouldn't be stunned if someone asked for McNeil in a trade and then the conversation progressed from there. But you're probably not doing anything at second base. Unfortunately, you can't replace Lindor until the next decade. So third base is kind of like, well, and then you go in the outfield. You could, in theory, do something in center field, but look at what Nimmo did to the offense when he came back. He has his advantages, huge advantages at the top of the lineup. You know who the rest of the Mets players are. I guess you could do something in left would be another option. If you want to admit that Dom Smith is not giving you the offense, they're not getting the offense out of left field this year that they should. And if Smith had not had the year he had last year, we probably would be having that conversation, right? He earned some benefit of the doubt. But if you really want to look at it cold and logically, third base and left field would be two places you could look to add at that. But so it's not so much that you don't need more out of right or center at times. It's like that you can't. We're not really. What are you going to do? Trade Michael Conforto? No.
Right. Right. I feel the same about shortstop. Realistically, second base and right field too. They're just positions. They're just positions. You have to rely on the guy you have to start playing better.
They're locked into people for better or worse. Whereas at third, they're not.
Right.
That's what it comes down to.
All right. I am back Thursday with Keith, and then I'm leaving the reins to Andy for quite some time on a little bit of a safari for you guys to joke about in my absence. I'm not actually going on a safari, and I haven't gone on a safari since I did go when I was a teenager, but it has not been relevant. Yeah.
Is there a picture of you with it like holding a tusk or something anywhere?
Well, no, I didn't. I'm not hunting animals. I'm looking at them and in awe.
Some people like to bring back trophies. It's a thing.
Yeah, what is it with you and Keith? It comes up that I'm on safari, which was incorrect and factually incorrect. Mm-hmm. And then I hear that I'm killing animals, and I'm not a hunter. When you go on safari, you just sit there and you wait to see a lion, and it's incredible.
And then don't you like stand next to a beautiful animal who you've sadly, tragically killed and smile into a camera?
No, not in my experience. Not in my. I don't think that's safari. I think that is an illegal hunting trip.
Oh, that's poaching.
That is called poaching. Yes.
Okay.
The ivory trade. It's a black market.
I don't know what you people from Connecticut do. I assume that's what it was.
No, it's just like at one point I put an album up. I was young enough to put a Facebook album up at the time of my pictures, and it was all animals either pooping or having sex.
There's something very funny
about that. Like we were in our like Jeep thing and driving down a road, and a leopard just was pooping right in the road in front of us. And of course I got a picture.
Yeah, I'm laughing at it.
Yeah, I mean, look, come on.
Those are two acts which speak to something very deep and primal inside of us, and because of that, they make us laugh. I heard a really good theory of why.
Never mind. Reminder to subscribe to the Shea Anything Podcast on your phone on a particular app that you listen to podcasts on, and a reminder that Shea Anything is brought to you by Verizon. It's 5G, built right for the Mets from the network more people rely on, only on Verizon. Andy, thanks for listening, everybody. We will talk to you later this week.